Good evening, everyone. A very big, bright, virtual hello to all the brilliant minds gathered here today. I hope your screens are glowing, your Wi Fi is cooperating, and your curiosity is wide awake because we are about to dive into yet another exciting edition of the fortnightly online symposia of In Tandem. So, today's session falls under our year long theme, Regions and Translations in Indian Writing. And trust me, it's going to be a ride across borders, dialects, maps, and metaphors. So, our title for today is East, West, and Central regions of India. Basically, we're traveling across the country without even needing a train ticket. So, sit back or lean forward with scholarly intensity, whichever works for you. So, we are in for a delightful, thought provoking afternoon. Before we get rolling, I just wanted to let the audience know that please keep your mics muted. If you have any questions or queries or any opinions, you can leave it in the chat box, and we will get back to you as soon as the presenters or the keynote speakers have done with the presentations. And yes, so ladies and gentlemen, let me now turn your attention to our first intellectual star of the day, Dr. KRUPA Shah, Associate Professor, Humanities and Social Studies, NIT Puducherry, a formidable scholar with an eye for satire, a mind sharp as a freshly sharpened quill, and a deep understanding of the literary currents of Western India. So today, she brings to us a topic that is as witty as it is weighty. Translating satire, Bhadrambhadra, and the politics of social reform in 19th century Gujarat. Now that's the kind of title that makes you sit straighter, doesn't it? Satire, translation, 19th century reform. It's like history and humor decided to hold hands and walls together. So, ma'am, we are absolutely thrilled to have you here, and the screen is all yours.
Thank you, Sai Krupa, for that extremely lively introduction. I could almost hear the drum rolls in the background somewhere. So I just see that Dr. Joshua has also joined, and I'd like to say hi to him because it was through him that we were able to connect on this platform. So happy to see you here. I have a PPT, so I'm just going to share that. Okay, is it visible?
No, ma'am, not yet.
All right. I think it says Meet needs permission to screen share.
Oh, okay, ma'am. Just 1 second. Ma'am, can you try again? It's already enabled.
Yes, we can see the screen.
Ma'am, sorry to interrupt, but I think you're on mute. We are not able to hear you.
All right. Is it? Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, yes, I just wanted to start by saying thank you to the Fortnightly Symposium of In Tandem Research Club for having me here. I think it's a wonderful initiative that you have here, covering so many geographies and scholars, bringing scholars together across so many different disciplines and giving the young minds an exposure to all sorts of different studies and approaches which are current. Right, so that's a very, very important initiative, and I'm really happy to be a part of it. My presentation today is part of a larger project, which is still an ongoing project. So I'll not be able to go too much in depth into it. But what I'm going to try to do today is to talk a little bit about this particular literary classic, which is called Bhadrambhadra, which is the first political satire in Gujarati, which is written by a very well known social reformer called Ramanbhai Neelkant in the 19th century. So before I move to my presentation, can you see the screen
Yeah.
Is the slide
Roadmap.
being visible?
Roadmap
Okay,
salient
yes,
aspect.
yes. So I'll begin by just talking a little bit about some of the salient aspects of late 19th century Gujarat, particularly the context of the social reform movement. And then I'll go on to just contextualize the novel and what it tried to do given its historical moment. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the uh, themes and the glimpses from the text and give examples from my own translation, which I've recently done, and finally conclude by talking about its significance and relevance today, even though it's a text which was published more than 100 years ago. So I like to talk about some of these things. So let me first take you to the historical moment, which in Gujarati this period is known as Sudharak Yug, which basically extends from the mid to late 19th century. The word Sudhar, which is roughly translated into reform in English, has a variety of different meanings. It means to correct, to amend, to set right. And the Sudharak is one who reforms or who is a reformer, basically. And Yug, as we know, it means age or period. So basically, these decades in the mid to late 19th century saw Western cultural values and English education and the rise of a reform minded intelligentsia. So, here English was both a language and a system of knowledge against which native knowledge was measured. And many of the first generation of Gujarati reformers were exposed to Western, values through some of the centers such as Elphinstone College, Bombay University, which became major places where they came into direct contact with Western knowledge and literary traditions. Alongside this, we also had the advent of the printing press in Gujarat and the establishment of a new public sphere and literary societies. So you had periodicals which came in print for the first time and which were read and which were discussed and which talked about a host of different social issues. We also had experimentations with different literary genres, and we had the rise of prose forms in the vernacular. So we had the essay, the autobiography, the short story, and so on. So this is a period where there's a lot of experimentation, a lot of social cultural change. And in this context, one of the towering sort of institutions which played an important role was the Gujarat Vernacular Society, which was a literary institution established in 1848 in Ahmedabad by a British administrator Alexander Kinloch Forbes, along with his collaborator and friend Dalpat Ram, who served as its secretary. Now, the main aim of this institution, this society, was to promote the Gujarati language and to create a sense of regional writing or literature. And it was also responsible for some of the first periodicals, the first newspaper, which was called the Budhvar, because it came on Wednesday, the Budhvar. There was also literary magazines such as Buddhi Prakash, which was extremely important for the social reformers. And this organization also tried to promote reform minded thinking through prizes and competitions which fostered vernacular writing. Um, so, apart from this English education, the colonial administration was also very deeply invested in writing the history, vernacular histories, and in trying to compile lexicographies on the language and to create textbooks which could be used in the universities in which they were, educating many of the first or second generation elite. And these attempts also spurred writers to try their hand at new forms of writing and new kinds of regional identity. Some of the first reformist interventions we see through well-known names like Durga Ram Mehta, Dada Bhai Navroji, Narmad, and so on. Karsan Das Mulji, many of you may have heard of the film Karsan, which came out recently and which had Amir Khan's son as a protagonist. So this was based on Karsan Das Mulji, who was a Gujarati reformer, and it was loosely based on his life and his confrontation with the sect, the religious sect, which was also involved in a host of malpractices. So basically, through all of these changes, what we see, the broad trends of the society in this time was a huge debate. And the debate was on the relevance, the interpretation of the meaning of the past, and what tradition meant with the onslaught of very different cultural changes which came with the colonial exposure. And many of these issues were discussed through public addresses, essay writing in magazines and in journals. And they were also very focused at social practices such as the indulgence in superstitions, child marriage, caste discrimination, and so on. And an intense discussion about the location of religion in society. Even the idea of women's education and training, or Stri Kelavani meaning training, was also a very important endeavor of the reformists. And along with these, we also had some of the first essays which came out on trying to impress the importance of rational free thinking among the general public, and which talked about the various religious evils and so on. So the first autobiography in Gujarati, Mari Hakikat, My Reality, which was recently translated in English, was also written in this period, along with poems like Jai Jai Karvi Gujarat, which is currently a very well-known anthem talking about an inclusive idea of Gujarat, open to different faiths and communities. So this was a time where you do see, in general, a conflict between radical reform and reformed revivalism. So there were authors who talked about the need to completely change structures and social institutions, and there were others who were more moderate and who said, no, we should not change everything radically, but reform and keep the past and keep the traditions which are also there. So in this tension, we have Bhadrambhadra, the novel which is written with Raman Bhai Neelkant clearly on the side of radical reform. And so he writes this book as a satire, trying to expose those who resist and continue to advocate for status quo. Now, it's also important to remember that the meaning of reform was very, very different and contested. It was not a uniform idea. It meant different things to different people, and it also was spread across different, domains. So we had moral or spiritual reform, which denoted personal ethical transformation and was used in religious discourses, especially in movements like the Swaminarayan Sampradaya and so on, where the idea of sudharu or reform was personal, and it meant to live a life of moral discipline, truthfulness, celibacy, and compassion, something which Gandhi was going to draw from later on in the 20th century. We also had the idea of Samaj Sudharu or social reform, which is a more traditional sense that we know, which meant the correction of social evils like child marriage and so on, and had clearly got the sense of amending wrongs, correcting a tradition which is not equitable or progressive. And then we also had Sudharu in terms of a gendered sense, where it was used in women's discourses, where discussions were around educating women but within limits, right? Trying to encourage widow remarriage, teaching women to be ideal mothers and wives. So the idea of reform was still centered around the better fulfillment of domestic roles. And many of the journals that came out at this time, Sri Bodh, Sri Mitra, Gunasundari, and all, were all centered on imparting moral education for training. So it was a very complex sort of a situation which I'm trying to explain. And of course, the idea of reform also had to do with caste. It had to do with the idea of inclusion, the demand for dignity, access, and representation, and was used in the term Jati Sudharo, which was used by Gandhi, along with the term Harijanodhar, which means the upliftment of the Harijans. So it had a very distinct meaning when it was used in the sense of caste, and definitely in the political sense. When we talk about political reform, the idea was not just remaining fixed to the local context, but thinking about national renewal or unification. And reform was also tied to movements like Swadeshi, Khadi, and non cooperation. And it gained a civilizational and moral nationalistic balance in Gandhian vocabulary. So, reform starts out right from the beginning of the 19th century, goes right through towards the 20th century with Gandhi's political philosophy as well. So it was not one thing, but it was dynamic and it remained a contested term. Now, where does Neelkant fit into all of these things? So Ramanbhai Neelkant's, was part of an important family of social reformers. He was educated at Ilkeston College. His wife was one of the first female graduates of Gujarat, and he was actively involved in the administration in various capacities. He was also a government. He worked at a government office and was a judge at Godhra, and was later also knighted. He served as a mayor of Ahmedabad, the first secretary of the Ahmedabad Red Cross, and also the president of the Sahitya Parishad. So, a very well known public figure and very influential administrator also. And he's known to have been quite prolific as well. So, he has a couple of novels, even a play which has been compared to Shakespeare's, Macbeth, because of the female protagonist there who draws heavily from Lady Macbeth. So we also see how writers of this time are including, what they have read, and how the English literary themes speak through the Gujarati as well. And various texts which are talking about religion and society, the history of Gujarat, um, and yes, all of these different things. Now, coming to the novel itself, right? As I said, this was known as the an iconic political satire and a Gujarati classic, and the first humorous novel with a first-person point of view. It was published in serialized form in a journal called Jnana Sudha, and it has been compared to Charles Dickens' Pickwick Papers and Cervantes' Don Quixote. So the author attempted to expose the rigidity, vanity, and hypocrisy of the conservative opponents of social reform, who saw it as a threat to cultural and religious identity. So the word Bhadrambhadra, it means good or chaste or genteel. Bhadra as in also well mannered, and is it also talks about the politics of language in this text, which where language is a very very important theme in the novel. So the basic plot of the novel is about a middle-aged Orthodox Brahmin whose mission in life is to fight the agenda of the social reformers and to save the cause of the Sanatana Arya Dharma, or the eternal religion of the Aryas, which has been endangered by the proliferation of Western values. Now, if we talk about something like this today, it can be quite contentious, but at that time, talking about this through the veneer of satire was extremely had a very interesting impact. The novel traces the journey of Bhadrambhadra and his disciple Ambaram as they travel to Mumbai to attend a rally against reform and have various misadventures on the way. So this is basically the plot of the novel. This is the cover. the most common sort of idealization, the archetype of this comic character called Bhadrambhadra, which became almost like a cultural trope. So the novel parodies Bhadrambhadra's excessive linguistic purism and self-serving religious posturing that constantly land him in trouble with street smart characters who outwit him. The novel also documents the protagonist's puzzling encounters with modern technology such as the train. He calls it the fire wagon and the post box. So, through its episodic chapters, the novel weaves in contentious issues of the time and parodies the resistance of the conservatives in the name of tradition and status quo. It also parodies the idea of the Yavani or the foreign in a language. It looks at social practices such as caste and the idea of religion, dharma, superstitious naming practices, and the greed of opportunistic writers in advancing personal fame. So let me give you certain examples now from my translation to make it slightly more interesting and then conclude in some time. So Bhadrambhadra has long eluded translators because it has been very, very difficult because of the cultural context of humor, because it's largely a satire and based, much of its impact is based on its humor and language. And it did not also get the same fame as its contemporary, the four-volume Saraswati Chandra, which has been extremely popular. But yet, Bhadrambhadra has been influential and a cultural trope, and most of its effect and humor are in its language and multilingualism. So the author Neelkant coins different words, invents shlokas, registers of Gujarati, and even mixes different idioms. He uses Sanskrit, Gujarati, or varied registers depending on the region, the caste, and class of the characters, Parsi inflections, Marathi, Hindi, English, and the transcriptions and transliterations of English in the Gujarati. So, as you can imagine, it's a very, very complex sort of a setup to translate. And let me give you an example of this. So, the novel begins with so Bhadram Bhadra is changes his name. Earlier, his name was Daulat Shankar. That's how the novel starts. And Daulat Shankar has a dream that he has offended Lord Shiva or Shankar because of his name Daulat Shankar. And Daulat is not a Gujarati word, it is a Perso Arabic word. So it comes from a foreign tradition. And so Shankar is upset that he has used a word like Daulat beside his name, and therefore he has committed a sin. So the character wakes up and realizes he has to atone for this sin and quickly changes his name to Bhadrambhadra. That's how the story begins. And he vows that henceforth he will speak only in the chaste Gujarati language without any kind of Yavani or foreign words. And now in this process, a lot of humor, takes place, where he calls instead of Mumbai, he reclaims the archaic name as Mohamai, which is the land of enchantment, where Moha means enchantment, and he gets in trouble because of that. Because he goes to the railway station and tries to get a ticket from a Parsi operator. And as we know, Parsi Gujarati is very different from other kinds of Gujarati. So he falls in trouble and he does not get what he wants. Instead of just calling it the vernacularized ticket, he calls it Mulya Patrika, which is an authorization pass. And the people around him don't understand what he's trying to say, and so on. Another instance is where he travels on train and is going to Mumbai to attend his anti-reform rally. And on the way, he meets Harjivan, a very sly and cheeky character who outwits the protagonist more than once and steals his money. In an interesting conversation, when Bhadrambhadra disapproves of the latter smoking, Harjivan comes up with a made up shloka from a made up Purana, the Dhumra Purana, to convince Bhadrambhadra that the Puranas call smoking a holy practice. So this is the shloka that the author invents and is part of the novel, which I have translated, as below. So Dhumrapanam Mahadanam Gote Gote Gaudanam Agnihotri Mahayoge Punarjanmasya Nashanam. Smoking is a greatly charitable act. Each swirl of smoke amounts to gifting a cow, as in the case of the holy Brahmin who maintains the sacrificial fire. It brings about the end of reincarnation. So this kind of a high language but a very light-hearted message is sort of the tone of the entire novel. And for those who are Gujarati readers, you will we notice the expression "gote gote," which is a very colloquial Gujarati expression, which is inserted into the Sanskrit, and which makes it even more kind of hilarious. So many instances are there like this. And But the more important context of Bhadrambhadra is also the religious debate that was there between Neelkant and his radical reform group, and versus another important critic called Manilal Dwivedi, who was the strongest proponent of revivalism and who believed that uh, tradition and cultural authenticity and identity had to be preserved in the face of colonial modernity and so on. And this debate was a very important debate which went on for almost 15 years through the writings of different journals. And it was acrimonious, but nevertheless, very important aspect of that time. And in this debate, I don't want to go too much into detail, but in this debate, he talks about the idea of Sanatanatva, what it means, and how we understand the Hindu religion without talking about some of the parameters which are there when we understand the Semitic faiths, for example. So the Hindu religion could not be defined by adherence to a given set of beliefs because the boundaries were fluid and this made it difficult to describe central beliefs. So, in the obsession with social and ritual practices, Hinduism had lost sight of Paramartha, the care for others. This is what Neelkant wrote in one of his very well known essays on understanding Hinduism. And this was countered by Manilal Dwivedi, who primarily represented the revivalist faction, and he was a staunch proponent of traditions and the Vedantic philosophy. In fact, he was invited to the same conference in Chicago that Vivekananda had also attended in the sometime in the early around the, yeah in the early 20th century. So I don't not going too much into this, but in order to sort of briefly conclude, I hope I'm on time.
You
How
have
much time?
time.
Yeah.
That's no. You can take a few more minutes. You can
All
take a
right.
few more minutes. Another
Okay.
five
Thank
minutes.
you. Okay.
5 to 7.
So okay. Okay. So Manilal Nabubhai Dwivedi, another very influential thinker, writer, and critic of the 19th century, was born in a Nagar Brahmin family. Nagar Brahmin households, generally known for their contribution to society and their being at the forefront of any kind of educational and social changes, came from a place near Ahmedabad called Nadiyad and from a family of moneylenders. And he also was a very well known writer and edited the magazine Sudarshan. He was seen as the intellectual heir of one of the most well known social reformers, who was Narmad, whose autobiography I talked about earlier, Mari Hakikat. And what his basically his idea was the importance of keeping a central notion of cultural authenticity intact without having to introspect it. And what Ramanbhai Neelkant was arguing for was to completely do away with any kind of resistance. So these two factions sort of completely remained locked with each other over the rest of the even the early 20th century. And this is a novel that comes out of that debate, and it's a novel that basically talks about the tension between cultural authenticity, preserving cultural authenticity, and giving into the need for introspection and historical and cultural renewal, and being open to different things. Yes. So finally, to sort of broadly conclude, what we get to know through the novel of Bhadram Bhadra is that reform was not a uniform, homogeneous idea. It was not always initiated by colonial forces or the colonial education system. It had a very robust internal sort of debate and dynamic between the thinkers themselves. Sometimes both the thinkers went through the system of education which was established by the colonial authorities but ended up having very different viewpoints. So, not all those who went through the colonial education system ended up becoming reformers in the traditional sense. We also had people who had contesting ideas, contesting domains, and talked about reform through the social, the domestic, the religious, the political, and so on in many different ways. So Bhadrambhadra as a novel is still very relevant to us in the tussle between preserving cultural identity and resisting the onslaught of so-called external or perceived threats, especially with the idea of the other, the foreign, and all of those terminologies. Language, of course, the novel shows us, is a central site for cultural and religious politics, especially through the idea of linguistic purism, where you advocate for a particular kind of chaste language and erase different traditions. So, Neil Kant remains very critical of language purism and says that he makes fun of both the purists and also those who actually spoil the project of the purists. Both of those. So, while reform itself may not be relevant to us today in terms of the social practices which are now obsolete, the question of religion and society still remain. And in that sense, the novel has a lot to offer with these debates and the need to redefine or to think about re-articulating cultural identity in non-divisive ways and to understand the notion of Sagvadiyo Dharma, which is a term which Neelkant also uses, where we use religion um, as an appropriation for vested interests and do not always see how it affects uh, any other articulation of regional or cultural identity. So, in that sense, Bhadrambhadra is timeless, although it is a kind of a novel from 19th century. It remains timeless because of these sort of things which come out from the uh, novel. So I have missed out a couple of slides thinking we may not have time, but maybe I'll just end with one last example from one of my translations. Okay, I think I have missed that. I don't have it here. Uh, okay, okay. All right, so I think that's what I have for today. And if there are any questions or any comments, I would be happy to discuss them.
Dr. Sneha, are you okay with questions being taken now? Because your two topics are very different. So if we could take
Yes, I
questions.
think you take her questions now. My questions
Yes,
can come at the end.
I think we have Joshua on the call. He's an experienced translator. So any questions from your side, Joshua? Joshua's there? Joshua's there? Yeah.
Hello, good evening, ma'am. Good evening, Dr. Krupa. Thank you for the presentation.
Good evening.
Uh, uh, well, I'm still trying to figure out. I was the major part of the presentation. I was traveling, and I just reached home, so I'm really sorry. I won't be able to contribute much. So,
Anyone else has questions? When I just want a little more, want you to throw a little light on what you said. Reform was not homogeneous. It's not. See, we assume that reform is is introduced by the Western intellectual, and we got parliamentary democracy, we got so much, we got roads, trains, bridges, everything through Western influence and through colonizing. we often talk of that as the plus side of colonization. So, could you elaborate on this thing that it was not only the coming from the Western education system; it was also from there was a contribution from the native uh,
Yes,
thinkers
yes,
who were
yes,
not necessarily Western educated.
yes, yes. So in the case that I'm talking about, both the author of the political satire and his opponent, both were Western educated. Both went through the colonial system, but ended up having opposite views, and that was what was interesting, because normally when we look at the general historical discourse of reform, social reform, and social reformers, we are talking about uh, people who were uh, brown in color but English in taste, the typical
Mm,
phrasing that
mm, mm.
Macaulay uses. But when we look at this, how people think about their own tradition and they come back to it in a very different way, then that generalized phrase is not always very relevant. There are a lot of internal discussions which are happening in journals in the vernacular, maybe not in English,
Yeah,
in which
that's
are
why I
which are
asked you because you said it began, way back in more than 100 years ago.
yes,
Mm.
yes. So, and some of these journals are only now being looked at least in the case of Gujarati, many of these remain unstudied, understudied, and they are only now being looked at. So, a lot of these very interesting conversations across time come back to us in very relevant ways, significant ways. And this novel that way remains, part of that dialogue into the present.
So both of them were educated in the Western system of education.
Yes, yes, yes.
So were there thinkers who actually had no connection with the Western system of education, reformers, social reformers, and thinkers?
Yes, I mean, there were those who did not necessarily, they were not aware of the colonial system. In fact, when we do look at the colonial administration in Gujarat, it was very different from how it worked out in, say, in Bengal or in Madras. It was very different because in
Yeah.
Gujarat, they had the support of the mercantile elites. Even Ramanbhai Neelkant, his political ideology was that under the British we would have a better welfare system, and we don't really need to rebel or resist that, which was very different from what we see in other parts of India at the time. So in Gujarat, in fact, only 4 or 5 places were directly under colonial rule. Much of the province, much of what was Gujarat at that time, remained in local hands, in native hands, and they had a kind of collision, not a collision, but an understanding that they would support the British in return for their own interests, which was very different from places where you had a very different, more antagonistic, more rebellious attitude. And given that situation where we had social reformers propagating ideas and trying to get social change based on that, and you also had internally different thinkers like Nabubhai who are talking about thinking only about the Gujarati identity or the cultural identity of the region. So that conflict is still very stark and is very interesting in the case of Gujarat.
Interesting. We don't have any questions right now. We'll go to the next presentation, and then if people have something to ask Dr. Krupa, they can always ask her.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kripa Shah ma'am, and what a wonderfully sharp, insightful, and downright entertaining expedition into the world of satire. It felt like Bhadrambhadra walked right out of 19th century and sat in the Google Meet with us. So, as Preeti ma'am said, please feel free to drop your thoughts in the chat. We'll circle back to them as soon as second keynote speaker finishes. Um and we are head. So now take a deep breath, even take a sip of water, because guess what? We are heading from the west straight to the east. Let me introduce another luminous presence in today's meet, Dr. Sneha Kar Chaudhuri, Associate Professor and Head, Department of English, West Bengal State University, scholar who reads landscapes like literature and literature like layered geography. So her research flows quietly, literary, like the rivers that wind through Bengal's cultural terrains. Her topic for today is geohistorical and geocritical readings of the Sundarbans in select Bengali web series. Now, that is a title that gives you goosebumps. Wall of ecology, history, and digital storytelling, all woven into the mysterious mangrove labyrinth of the Sundarbans. So, ma'am, we cannot wait to be transported. Please take us into the ties of your thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that kind introduction and for inviting me. In the recent past, I've been working on the films of Sham Benegal, and I've published a book with the Edinburgh University Press. And then I was doing a work on feminist Hindi Bollywood biopics, which has been published by Routledge last year. My forays into film and media studies has given me this interest in trying to look at the web series as an emerging art form, as an emerging media, as the most popular one that is possibly here. And I have recently started working on some of these web series which are predicated on the idea of rural India, because I think that I work in a university which is situated partly in a rural space, and in recent times in Bengal, apart from the major metropolitan universities, the government has taken the grand initiative of establishing universities all over the state in districts which were remote, and therefore there has been an emphasis and resurfacing of interest in various kinds of rural spaces and how they operate as upcoming spaces of culture, education, and improvement. Recently, I'm working on these kind of Bengali web series, which are looking at the various phases of Bengal's hinterlands, and Sundarban being one of the most famous examples, but then also looking at North Bengal, or like in narratives like Talma, Romeo and Juliet, and where this is a small town and a village kind of a space, or Daini, which means a witch, translated as witch, where this is a very popular series which was looking at the way in which superstition and the witchcraft was a huge problem in the rural areas, and how urban people confront it. And one of the most important things about this paper, and as I said in the beginning, and I was traveling, I had gone to Purulia, where in a media studies conference had spoken on another set of web series which were dealing with the rural realities and how the urban people, because you have to see that the web series as such is a very urban form, and it is mainly consumed by a young urban audience. So one of the most important things that we have about a web series is that it is consumed by very educated, very privileged, and extremely well-to-do youngsters. And as a form, since the web series is quite stark, realistic, experimental, minimalistic, then of course it is important to talk about the moral impact that it has about the audience, because when it is private viewership, then it is not like a big film which is releasing on a big screen and there's a public viewership, but a web series is as such is meant for private consumption, and therefore the moral ethical paradigms of viewership become very important. Now please go to the second slide. Yes. So with that background in mind, I would like to, since I was introduced to this platform by Professor Debashri Dottra, who's from the Department of Comparative Literature, Jadavpur University, who is my friend for long, and she has been working on ecology and eco-criticism recently. And I know that when she had told me that, I told her that I won't be able to talk much on literature, because if I talk about the Sundarban literature, it would definitely be on Amitabh Ghosh, The Hungry Tide, that novel, which is very iconic and popular. And I just don't want to like talk on a topic which is so widely discussed. And then I told her that I would like to look at some of these web series which are there. And then when she told me about the focus of the work, I saw that that you people are interested and you're trying to, though the thrust I can understand is on translated literature, vernaculars, literature in translation, but also on maybe the geopolitical, the geohistorical, and the geocritical dimensions of how literature imagines different kinds of social realities. So I also wanted to make this a little student-friendly lecture, and to start with the basics, that if you think of geopolitics, it would initially the model which was provided by Halford Mackinder and Alfred Mahan, it was largely about how geopolitics is a study of political views and aims of a nation according to its geographical position, and how this mattered, the influence of geography on the behavior of the individual nation, and how it affected international relations. But then, having given this definition, this was very Eurocentric and it was doing rounds in the 1990s. Then, of course, in the new millennium, there were a lot of experiments with the word geopolitical, where in 2021, I quote Shiv Shankar Menon, who said that the geopolitics is study of influence of factors as diverse as geography, economics, demography, on the foreign policy of a state, and also it brings into focus the power politics, the state's quest for power through geography, history, economics, and demography, among others. So when Menon is putting all these into mind, he is in certain ways trying to come to terms with the complexity of the word geopolitical, which means that it is not just confined to the nation's relation with the international, but also with the internal factors, and all of them are relativized. And in India, we know that since there are so many different provinces and states, that this geopolitical would imply that there are these kinds of local differences and similarities between one state and the other, and how that kind of cultural, geographical, economic, and civilizational difference or similarity breeds a set of commonalities and interpenetrations, and also maybe some shared understanding. Then please go to the next slide. Then if we think of the emergence of related disciplines to geopolitical studies, it would be geohistory and geocriticism. In geohistory, what we find is that what the critics are trying to do is to specifically focus on the geography of a certain space and to look at its history at the same time, and see how a particular geographical region is shaped by its historical events and the societal features of that kind of a society. And from Ferdinand Brodel, who uses space and geography as integral parts of historical analysis, we realize that Brodel is trying to combine some of the findings of the space studies theorists like Edward Sawyer in his concept of third space, and then also the concept of urban cartographies by Blashaw. And we also have this idea from coming from Foucault of alternative spaces, of the spaces of the carnivalesque. So geohistory is again a emerging field which talks about a constellation of spatiality, temporality, and societal and cultural patterns of a certain demographic presence or a certain demographic space. Related to that is, of course, geocriticism, which, as I have pointed out, is a method of literary analysis, and it sees that how literature or any other cultural text, it can be a film, it can be a documentary, it can be a set of prose works, it can be a set of poems, or maybe it can be just a kind of a architecture or sculpture or painting, all the other arts apart from literature, which sort of yield a certain understanding of a geographic space. And Bertrand Westphal uses this word geocritic in France, which was again used by Robert Talley in his concept of literary cartography. And these two are largely coterminous. And what we find is that, please go to the next slide, that a geocriticism therefore involves the study of places as is described in literature by various authors or represented in art, various art forms, and it is the study of effects of literary representations of a given space and cultural representations of that space. And geocritical approaches to literature also can be often very transgressive, crossing the boundaries of the established norms, which also re-establish new relations among people, places, and things. And geocriticism as intellectual and methodological affiliations with ecological literature, with regional literature, urbanity studies, and philosophical and sociological approaches to literature. Because if we want to arrive at a geocritical reading of texts, we can always understand that it would yield a very complex web of discursive constructs which are officially disseminated about a certain geopolitical space, as opposed to the lived realities and lived experiences of that kind of a space. Because it is also possible to point out that in geocriticism, what we see is that a literary or a cultural text can always yield certain contrapuntal or subversive or transgressive images and micro narratives of a certain geographical space, which they imagine in terms of being literary or cultural or imaginative or creative constructs, which often the administrative and the historical records of a certain geographical sphere might not contain. So with these ideas, when I narrow down to the understanding of how all these theories gel with the rise of Sundarban studies in Bengal, because there is this, please go to the next slide. There is this very fertile field of literary studies on Sundarban in Bengal, especially those which has been done by the literary historians. And this kind of an historical approach actually has its reverberations in Sundarbans, where we see that since Sundarban studies, where scholars like Shrutapa Sarkar, they have done some foundational work and field work based studies, where we know that Sundarban, it has a very unique position geographically and in terms of a landscape, but it is highly problematic and highly contested in terms of being a space which has a geographical and cultural and human presence, and how those complexities are produced by a combination of political, economic, and other kinds of factors. What we see is we know that Sundarban is this legendary world of Dokhin Rai and Bono Bibi. Dokhin Rai being the tiger, the reigning deity of the tigers of Sundarban, and Bono Bibi representing the forces of the human who protect the human from the ravages of nature, mainly the Bengal tiger, who is a man eater actually, and that's the most dangerous thing about the Bengal man eater. Therefore, the most popular cults and religious practices center around the cults of Bono Bibi and Dokhin Rai, and there are many cultural practices and performances which are related to that. But then also, we know that in terms of the ecosystem of the mangrove forest that Sundarban has, it has a very important ecological and scientific presence in the landscape of Bengal. And also, it is one of the most well known places where honey and wood is produced, and there's a lot of tourism centering around it, and pisciculture, which are the major things that happen in that area. But also, we have to keep in mind that it is an area which is near to the sea coast, and therefore prone to all kinds of natural calamities and cyclones and floods. And therefore, what is very problematic about this Sundarbans is that it is an geographical space which has very little connection with stability. And despite having this kind of a natural richness which is offered by the forests, we also realize that there are many of these problems with the water bodies and the forests, especially the wild animals and the kind of porous borders with Bangladesh, and the all the floods and all the kind of cyclones that are there, because there is a heavy concentration of water bodies in that area. And therefore, what we see is, despite this kind of natural diversity and geodiversity, it becomes a space where human beings find it very difficult to have a stable employment, and therefore unemployment is very high. And the local villagers, they mostly depend on cultivation of wood from the forests, and also honey maybe, and they are fishermen communities. They are partly a part of the tourism world, but then also, despite all this, their death rate is very high. Most of them, while collecting honey in the forests, they are killed by the tigers or the venomous snakes or other wild animals. And also, there is this problem of crime, and since it's a cross-border area, criminal activities like poaching, then robbery and trafficking, which are always very high. And this Sundarbans being the hotbed of crime provides the most important example. Yes, the next slide, where I talk about these two web series which have been very recent, 2022. This is the one which was both of them actually one of the this one was produced by Hoichoi, which is a very popular OTT platform in Bengal. And here we have this narrative of Sundarbaner Vidyasagar. Now, Vidyasagar, you know of Ishwarchandra Vidyasagar. Ishachandra Vidyasagar was a reformer and an educationist and a scholar. And this young boy named Kinkor Kormokar, who is the protagonist of the Sundarboner Vidyasagar, which means Vidyasagar of Sundarbon, was born on 20th September, the day Vidyasagar was born. And there's a comic beginning in the narrative where we see that the parents and the father who had a bookshop, he always felt that his son would be as good and as great in studies as Vidyasagar, and he studies honors in Sanskrit, even if it is like not very popular nowadays. And they think that he will give a very good result, and he gets only 49%. And then there's a lot of disillusionment about this boy who was actually a very much controlled by his parents, and he had very little access to any kind of freedom and assertion. Then after having done badly in his graduation, he decides to take up a job with an NGO and goes to the Sundarbans. Now, that itself, the narrative is comic in the beginning because it tries to show that how this Kinkor Kormokar is a very tentative character, a very diluted personality, and has very little self assertion, being completely dominated by his father and his mother as well, and therefore carrying that burden of being Vidyasagar. And now he cannot become Vidyasagar because he's not a good student. But then there's an irony in the title which comes out true in the end, and we realize that he becomes a Vidyasagar. How that happens? That when he goes to this space, he is given this task to, as an NGO worker, to sort of, this is very important, that in the poster also you see that apart from King Court, there's another woman who's peeping, and she is the female protagonist of this narrative, who is a widow. Because most of these women in the villages of Sundarban, they become widows at a very young age, because most of their husbands die killed by tigers and snakes when they collect honey and wood from the village, from the forests. And often, even if they are fishing, you will see videos in the internet that when they go fishing, even the tigers and the crocodiles, they attack them. And so the death rate there of the young men, they are very high. And all these women are converted to widows at a very young age, and they become very precarious and vulnerable. And what this project that King Kor goes for is to elevate these people and to support the widows, and to give them some education and some vocational training so that they can become independent. And therefore, this narrative tries to draw a connection between the geohistorical, social, cultural, and temporal and spatial realities of Sundarbans, the widows, the downtrodden, and how Vidyasagar, since we know that he is associated not only with the rise of vernacular Bengali education, the empowerment of women through their education, and also he was the one who was the harbinger of remarriage. So now we see that Kinkor is the modern Vidyasagar who is engaging with the widows. And what do we see here is, therefore, there is this strong plot of an array of different kinds of people who are preying upon the common people, the local political leaders, the small time, all kinds of dangerous goons and pimps and touts who are there, who are very violent and criminal, and they have cross-border connections, and they carry lethal illegal arms with them. And Kinkor, as we know, is a very soft-natured person who gets very scared of the situation and he wants to run away, that I cannot do any work to help the widows here. But then this girl who is very spirited, and she has a group of other friends who are also widows, and they encourage her that you have to face all these people, because basically what the local people were trying to do is to open a resorts and create certain kinds of rackets of female trafficking. And these widows would be apparently asked to work in these resorts and hotels, would actually work as prostitutes there. So they were not willing to do that, but then there was a lot of political and local pressure from the panchayat and the panchayat heads, who were all women, and even the antagonist is a woman who is going to head this resort industry. And we find that with a lot of support from these widows, Kinkor is able to undo this kind of an injustice, and he is able to report to the authorities against the criminals, and sort of bust this whole idea of having resorts where the widows would be abused. And so we see that here when the flesh trade and a typical kind of a sex trade was ruling the roost. Here, this young man who comes from the urban educated world, he draws this humanitarian connection. He also grows this romantic connection with the widow who helps him to sort of unravel the criminal plots. And we see that there is this kind of a very distinctive connection which is established between the urban and the rural, and where the urban might be superior, in a way might be superior. And we see, but then also, again, when I come to the next narrative, this connection between the urban and the rural, where this tentative and very jittery young man, he emerges as a hero. He becomes like Vidyasagar, who had to face a lot of flack and lot of criticism during his lifetime for educating women, for promoting widow remarriage. The same thing happens to Kinkor, but he sort of navigates that negativity. Similarly, in Abar Proloy, which has been produced in 2023 by another very popular OTT in Bengal, that is Z5. Our prologue means the storm again, because there has been a prologue, another narrative before. So this is a second part. I have mentioned that it is written and directed and produced by Raj Chakraborty, who is a very important and influential MLA of the ruling party, Trinamool Congress here. And he is from the Barakpur region, and he is the one who was very active part of the film industry. He produced this narrative where we see that this man, Shashwat Chatterjee, playing Animesh Dotto, the crime branch officer, who goes to investigate another case of missing girls, of girls being trafficked across the border. And this is also a story which predicates itself on the demography, population, economy, and crime connection that we have in Sundarban. And what we see here is very dangerous. Please go to the next slide. Please go to the next slide. Right. We see that there are this group of local men who sort of seduce the very young, vulnerable girls, the village girls of Sundarban, and give them the temptations of marriage and a better life or better jobs. And then they traffic them to Bangladesh or to some other regions of India, and they maintain this very steady network of selling the girls to foreign customers. And this is supported by the local hooligans and the anti-socials and some of the smaller political leaders. And what we see is that the crime branch officer, he in a very glorious way, in a very heroic way, which is somewhat reminiscent of the police characters of mainstream cinema, he intervenes upon and unfurls this plot. So what we see is that he's able to sort of resist this idea of some kind of suffering and elevate the common people and the worried parents and their families who have lost their young girls. And then we see that there is a complicity of some of the people representing the police, and they are part of this flesh trade. But at the same time, there are loyal and honest officers who support him, and local people who are still honest and they support him. And this idea that the state is there to protect the marginalized and the oppressed of Sundarban is also offered in this narrative by a director who is also an MLA and a representative of the state government and the administration. And this narrative of Abar Proloy offers a sense of hope that yes, there might be a lot of crime, there might be a lot of dissension, poverty, discrimination, and uncertainty and instability in Sundarbans. But then, with an able state government intervening upon it, it is possible to resist those criminals and to undo the sufferings of the common people who have been appropriated by these kind of pimps and hooligans and goons. And this is again a powerful narrative which does throw very detailed light on this nexus where the common people of the village, they, because of money, as I said, that there is so much of poverty in Sundarbans that they get very easily involved in Sandesh Khali or in Kumir Khali, all these places where it is very common, or Goshaba, where Animesh Datta is tracking all the criminals. He realizes that they get involved, and even people in the police and the administration, and how because of having a porous boundary with Bangladesh, there is so much of crime which is happening internationally, and there is a big nexus around it. So these two narratives, to conclude just whatever I had to say, that they throw light on how we have a kind of a certain cultural geography and geocritical awareness in these narratives about the way in which the spatial, the temporal, the natural, the human, the demographic, economic has they have been interwoven in these narratives of crime and resistance, and how they try to offer this kind of antidote, and both are optimistic in nature, and they try to say that the urban intervention and the urban presence is important because though it reiterates a binary that the urban is superior, Animesh Datta and Kinkor Kormokars are heroes from the urban background. But apart from that, there are many local people who are supporting these urban heroes. So again, as I'm saying, that it creates humanitarian narratives of urban-rural bonding and breaks that typical divide and tries to show that even if the backward hinterlands of Bengal, like Sundarban, they have so many problems associated with them in terms of their geopolitical and geohistorical presence, but still it is possible to intervene upon them and create new spaces of understanding and realization. So more or less I've said what I have to say. I'll be happy if there are some comments and observations. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you, Dr. Sneha Kar Chaudhuri, ma'am. And that was nothing short of mesmerizing. Journey through the Sundarbans that felt atmospheric, dense, cinematic, and really beautiful all at once. So, who knew web series could carry such a geocritical weight? Uh, so on behalf of our college, we girls are doing second MA right now, and we are on our last semester. And previously, we had film and media studies and green literature together as two papers. But today, through your presentation, we got a lot of insights. With both, film and media and also green literature. So it's just a wonderful address, ma'am. Thank you so much. We are so grateful. And you have officially made us look at our OTT platforms with a whole new level of seriousness and enthusiasm. So, thank you so much, ma'am. All right, audience. So, if any questions, comments, confusions, uh, disguised as clever queries, we welcome them all. Unmute yourself or type away in the chat box. We are here to explore, and we can discuss it further.
I'm willing to talk about the web series as a form as well. So, if you want that, if you don't want to ask anything on the Sundarbans, but since I'm working on the form of the web series as such, and the kind of stylistic features of the web series, because the youngsters, as I know, yes, all the students, as you are mentioning, Sai Krupa, that they know that it's very important to them, but maybe it's not taken that seriously as a it's taken as a part of pop culture till now, and is not taken seriously by scholars of cinema or media. So that hierarchy is still there about the web series, which is I think soon going to break. That because I think the web series plots and conventions are very radical, and they're changing the way cinema is being perceived as such. The big screen narratives are being perceived. They are like questioning them.
You were mentioning the shrine of Bonbibi,
Yeah.
and that is often cited as a place of interfaith, you know,
Hmm.
Muslim
Yes.
and
Yes.
Hindu.
Yes. Yes.
So, who are the people of Sundarban? Is it this kind of syncretism? Is it part of their, or is it just one isolated thing, or it's very much a part of that region?
Actually, those people or scholars who've worked on area studies, they say that if we think in terms of lived realities, the Sundarban people have always had a lot of cultural and really kind of an intercommunal integrity. But often when it comes to the crime scenes, there is a divide between the Hindus and the Muslims, because unfortunately, because of the cross-border connections with Bangladesh, lot of these local Muslim guys, and there are many good Bangladeshi films as well on this kind of cross-border links with Sundarban, where you see that local Muslim guys are often reused, and they are sort of enthralled, and they are given this kind of a seduction and bait of religion to work against the Hindus. And so this trafficking story of Abar Prola does talk about some of the Muslim guys using the pattern of love jihad to seduce Hindu girls. And some of the local criminals, I think that there's, of course, there's kind of a religious typification there, that some of the local criminals are named as Muslim characters. So again, this idea that the Muslims are more criminalized and they can do anything for money, this trope is there, because again, these narratives are more Hindu oriented, and there we don't see that cultural syncretism of the Bon Bibi cult, which is apparent, but rather it is a kind of a Islamophobia which surfaces. And that itself is a little cliched, because this idea that the Muslims are criminals is untrue and not always verifiable. But it is easy to use them in a narrative which is predominantly Hindu oriented. And at least in these two web series, we see the criminals have a Muslim background. That is a problematic thing, definitely. Thank you for pointing that out.
Any other questions? Comments, observations? So even this thing about trafficking, as you pointed out, is a feature of border regions, borderlands. With Nepal also we have that, right?
Yes, yes, yes. And this also in the context of North Bengal, this is even more prone because a lot of these people from the northeast and North Bengal, these girls are sent to by treachery, given a false impression of getting a job or getting married, and the same thing happens there. But
Mm.
again, these two narratives they identify Sundarbans because again it is easy to like project this kind of relation with Bangladesh, which again is highly contested because there are many of these films, like if you think of Gautam Ghosh's Shankochil, which talked about how illegal immigration in Bangladesh, with Bangladesh, the sharing of the borders and boundaries, and illegal entry of people from Bangladesh, which is one of the problems associated with the SIR debate in Bengal.
Mm.
This is more popular, and that is why I think there is this kind of political motivation to do web series on the Indo-Bangladesh border, and Sundarbans happens to be that. So the choice is very strategic,
Mm.
and wish they were, yes, it is politically generated
Mm.
choice. And as I said, Raj Chakraborty is himself, he was just a producer and director before, and then he joined politics, and he's the MLA, a very influential MLA now. And so when he is doing his work post his political career, he's very conscious of what will work with the audiences, because again the web series has to be commercially viable,
Mm.
despite the fact that it is not mainstream entertainment. But
Mm.
the fact that it would continue over season one and two, three, and or so on, the sequels, and will only happen if the response is positive and successful. So the choice, and Abar Prola incidentally was very successful because Shashwat Chatterjee is again one of the very prime and successful actors. His character was very well received. So we can again see Abar Prola 2, 3, 4 coming up. Maybe not on Sundarban, but of course with very strategic choices. And therefore, Nepal is not a choice because it's less formidable neighbor and less formidable another. But the problem of trafficking is definitely there.
Yeah. Uh, Dr. KRUPA, just curious how you've chosen Gujarati writing. You are located in South India, Puducherry. Is Gujarati your mother tongue?
I'm sorry, I'm having some network issues. I'm not sure if you can hear me. Can you
I can
please
hear
repeat
you.
the question? Yeah.
The question is, how is it that you are engaged with Gujarati literature? Do you know Gujarati? Is it your mother tongue?
Yes, it is my mother tongue actually. It is my mother tongue. I did my PhD at IIT Gandhinagar, and
Achha.
my supervisor has also been very involved in the field of translation. And she's also well known for translating a writer called Kanailal Munshi, who's a classic writer from the 20th century. So I've had a very sort of an enduring interest in the cultural context of Gujarat, particularly since I grew up in the south. So
Yeah,
there's always
actually,
yes.
yeah.
So my family is based in Pondicherry, and I grew up here. I studied here, but only during the course of my PhD, I went to Gujarat and sort of had a cultural immersion and was able to study the context and culture of the place by being there. So it was a kind of a way of going back or coming home in a way. And so translation also was a way of getting better at the language and getting more familiar with the literary tradition of a region which is not very associated with literature. When you think about
Mm,
Gujarat, I think some of the first associations are commerce or business, uh,
mm,
or very mercantile people, and of course diabetes. A lot of Gujarati food has a lot of sugar. So some we don't really associate Gujarat with a very long literary tradition. Definitely not like classical, say Tamil literature and all. So this was a way of just exploring that, and a lot of Gujarati writing is borrowed writing, if I can say that. It has come through translation. It has come through even some of the Bengali writers have come to Gujarat through translation. So much of their writing is speaking through other traditions, and translation is a way of discovering all of that. I've
it
had a good.
might be sort of connected to the fact that they are mercantile also. That the
Yes,
transact, yeah, there's a lot of
absolutely.
exchange.
Yes, yes, especially with the influence of people like Gandhi, and mixing this mercantile ethos tradition, trying to also talk about the non-violent tradition, trying to talk about nationalism and the political philosophy of Sardar, Vallabhbhai Patel, and all of the people who came from the political ethos of Gujarat. Very different perspectives, a very grounded, very practical sort of view. And the literature of the time also reflects that. You don't
Mm,
really get a very ornate, kind of effusive writing. Is also very terse, very context oriented, and this novel also, which is around social reform, very was also talking about very practical things, how to maintain our sense of cultural authenticity from outside influence, and at the same time how not to be stubborn, right, or how not to be parochial or limited. So I think in different Indian languages we would have different conflict when it comes to the colonial encounter, even with Bengali, with Bangla, or with in the case of the colonial history in Madras, for example, you would have
mm,
different instances. So that part is interesting to study, especially the collaborative nature of all of these literary projects, like history writing, coming up with lexicographies, mapping languages, and trying to figure out how to standardize a language, which dialect to take as a standard. Uh, so much of this discussion happens with the colonial, administrative setup.
mm. It's mediated that way, maybe.
Yes, yes.
So thank you both. It's been, as Sai Krupa was saying, culturally very remote from where we are in Chennai now. And I'm sure our girls enjoyed listening to both of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, thank you.
Sai, we can close.
Okay, ma'am. So we slowly glide to the end of today's symposium. Let me extend my heartfelt gratitude to our two powerhouse speakers, Dr. KRUPA Shah and Dr. SNEHA Kar Chaudhuri, for lighting up our minds with their scholarship passion, and our HOD and faculty for nurturing this research ecosystem with such care, and each one of you here today for showing up, thinking deeply, and listening generously. So, this session has taken us across regions and rivers, histories and languages, satire and swamps, reminding us that literature is not just written, it is lived, breathed, translated, traveled, etc. So thank you all for being such a wonderful audience. Until next time, stay curious, stay inspired, and have a lovely evening. Thank you all. And I just wanted to say that there is a form left for you guys in the chat box. So kindly, participants fill the for Google form.
Bye bye.